At 0612 hours, these 3 Russian aircraft had no idea a dozen FP-2 drones were screaming over the Black Sea at 80 meters altitude, headed straight towards them. 40 kilometers ahead of the drones sat Belbek Air Base, Russia's most important one in Crimea, where those planes and numerous air defenses were hosted. In less time than it takes to have a pizza delivered, Ukraine will deal one of Russia's largest single combat aviation losses of the war. The drones flew in 3 loose groups of 4, spreading across 2 kilometers of open water. At 80 meters, they were below the horizon line for most search radars, invisible until they hit the 30-kilometer mark, where the curvature of the Earth stopped hiding them. The lead group crossed the line at 0613. Somewhere ahead, the Russian radar antennas were already rotating, searching, and painting empty sky where the drones would appear in seconds. The operators in Ukraine couldn't see what was coming next. Their video feeds wouldn't activate until terminal approach. For now, they watched telemetry data, altitude, heading, and airspeed. 12 green icons crawling toward a coastline bristling with systems designed to wipe them out. Then the first radar found them. The NATO SVU early warning radar sat on a rise northwest of the main runway, its antenna rotating once every 6 seconds. Most radars struggle to see small drones. Their radar-absorbing coatings and composite airframes scatter the signal into noise. But the NATO SVU operated on VHF wavelengths, frequencies so long they bounce off anything larger than a meter across. Stealth shaping means nothing when you have a wave bigger than the thing it's hitting. The FP-2's 6-meter wingspan lit up like a bonfire. At 0614, the radar operator watched 12 contacts materialize. Range 38 kilometers, bearing 315, closing at 150 kilometers per hour. He keyed the alert to the S-400 battery. Threats inbound. Request engagement. The response came back in seconds. Negative. The S-400 would not engage. The problem wasn't willingness, it was physics. The S-400's targeting software was designed to filter out birds and weather clutter by automatically ignoring anything moving slower than 100 kilometers per hour. These drones were cruising at 95. On the S-400 screens, they flickered like ghosts, appearing for one sweep and vanishing the next, never holding a solid track. This was because of something called velocity filter, essentially a spam filter for radar. When Russia designed it in 2007, the logic was sound. Anything moving slower than 100 kilometers per hour was noise, birds, or weather balloons, not worth tracking. It's like programming your email to delete everything from senders you don't recognize. Works great until your most important message comes from an unknown address. The drones cruising at 95 kilometers per hour weren't spam. They were the main threat, and the S-400 was automatically deleting them. The only system that could engage now was the Panzer S-2, and it was 3 kilometers away, covering the fuel depot. At maximum road speed across the base, it would take 4 minutes to reach the radar site. The drones would arrive in 6. The math looked uncomfortable. The Nebo radar kept tracking, feeding data into a command network that assumed help was coming. The FP-2s crossed the coastline at 0617, still at 80 meters, invisible to everything except the Nebo's long wavelength radar. Russian GPS jammers were saturating the spectrum with enough electromagnetic noise to scramble a cruise missile's navigation. But the drones weren't relying on GPS. Each one carried a navigation computer running 3 systems simultaneously, GPS when available, an inertial unit tracking acceleration and rotation, and a downward-facing camera comparing the ground below against stored satellite imagery. The camera saw the coastline, it saw road intersections and building clusters. It saw the distinctive curve of Sevastopol's harbor and knew exactly where it was thanks to something called terrain matching. The drone's camera takes a snapshot of the ground below. Then the computer breaks it into a grid of light and dark pixels. The grid gets compared against the same location from the stored satellite image. If the grids match, the drone knows exactly where it is. If they don't, say the drone is drifted 50 meters east, the computer calculates the offset and corrects. 10 times per second, snapshot after snapshot, the system building confidence in its position without ever needing a GPS signal. The Russians could jam every frequency in existence and it wouldn't matter. You can't jam a camera looking at the ground. The jammers were screaming, the drones just ignored them. Range to the closest Nebo radar now, 8 kilometers. Time to impact, 3 minutes. The Panzer was 2 kilometers from the radar site when it hit something unexpected. A fuel truck had stopped in the middle of the access road, its driver probably taking a snooze. The Panzer driver hit the horn. Nothing. He got on the radio, demanding the vehicle move. Still nothing. The driver's radio was probably sitting on the passenger seat, turned down or turned off. 30 seconds burned. 45. The Panzer brutally lurched around the truck, bouncing through a drainage ditch, suspension groaning. A whole minute lost. The drones were now 2 minutes out instead of 3. At 0619, the lead FP-2 pulled up to 400 meters from its terminal dive. The Nebo SVU painted it instantly, but painting wasn't engaging. The radar could see the drone perfectly. It could track the dive angle and calculate the impact point. It could do absolutely nothing to stop what happened next. The shaped charge hit the antenna array 7 seconds later. $35 million of VHF radars scattered across the hillside. The system that could detect stealth aircraft at 100 kilometers had been destroyed by a drone it saw coming for 6 full minutes. The second Nebo SVU sat 800 meters east. 90 seconds later, it too was burning. Belbeck had just gone blind. No early warning, no long-range detection. Threats could now approach within 40 kilometers before anyone knew they were coming. But the S-400 still had its fire control radar, the 92N6, the system that actually guided missiles to targets. Without the Nebo radars to cue it, the 92N6 was working harder, scanning frantically for threats it should have seen coming minutes ago. Someone had decided this radar was too valuable to lose, so they built protection for it. Only problem was this protection was better at keeping bunnies out of your garden than defeating drones. The 92N6 radar sat 400 meters from the S-400 missile launchers. Its phased array antenna sweeping the sky for targets the Nebo radars were no longer able to warn it about. This was the radar that made the S-400 work. The missiles themselves were just rockets with guidance packages. Without the 92N6 telling them where to go, they were just expensive fireworks. Russian knew Ukrainian drones had been systematically destroying radar systems across Crimea for 3 years. Someone had finally decided to protect this one. 3 FP2s were now approaching from the northeast, their terminal cameras already locked on to the 92N6. The radar was impossible to miss. All those electronics pumping out energy made it glow white hot against the cold December ground. The lead drone began its dive at 0622, coming down at 47 degrees, well outside the angle of the cage it was designed to protect. The steel bars that would have stopped a horizontal approach did nothing against a weapon falling from the sky. The warhead punched through the top of the radar vehicle and detonated inside. Secondary explosions rippled through the compartment as electronics cooked off. The cage just stood there, completely intact, undamaged, protecting a system that no longer existed. Cost of the cage? Maybe $50,000 in steel and welding. Cost of what it failed to protect? $60 million and their pride. But by now, the Panzer had finally reached the radar site. It arrived just in time to watch the third drone destroy its target, a communications relay that linked the S-400 to the regional air defense network. 7 FP2s remained, and they were turning toward the flight line. The Panzer's crew had maybe 90 seconds to stop them. The Panzer lurched to a stop at the radar site, its crew skipping stabilization procedures to get the search radar spinning. Somewhere in the darkness, more drones were still flying. Every second of delay was a second closer to impact. The operator found them immediately. 3 contacts, bearing 045, 4 kilometers out, 400 meters altitude, and descending. Roughly 80 seconds to weapons release. The Panzer carried 12 missiles. Each one could accelerate to 3 times the speed of sound in 2 seconds and pull turns that would shred a fighter jet. The tracking radar could follow a target the size of a soccer ball at 10 kilometers. Against 3 slow drones flying in a straight line, 12 missiles should have been like a Pee Wee football team versus the Patriots. But it was Ukraine who was deflating their footballs this time around. First missile away at 0624. But one-way attack drones don't evade. They're already planning to explode. The only question was which explosion came first. The missile won. The lead drone became a spray of burning fragments at 3.2 kilometers. 11 missiles remaining, 2 drones left. Second launch 6 seconds later, but the Ukrainian operators had been watching, and they'd done something clever. At the moment of launch, the 2 remaining drones crossed paths, their radar returns merging into a single blob on the Panzer's screen before separating again. This is because radar doesn't see shapes, it sees reflections. When 2 drones fly close together, their returns merge into a single blob of reflected energy. The missile seeker was tracking one specific blob. When that blob suddenly became 2 blobs moving in different directions, the computer had to guess which one was the original target. It's a coin flip, and the seeker picked wrong. The drone it was chasing exploded, and the drone it should have been chasing kept flying. The second drone exploded at 2.4 kilometers, but the third was now at 1.1 kilometers, inside the distance the missile needed to arm its warhead. Every guided missile requires space to activate its fuse. Too close, and it's just a metal tube. The Panzer's missiles needed 1,200 meters. The drone was 100 meters inside that line. The operator switched to guns, twin 30mm cannons, 5,000 rounds per minute combined, designed to create a wall of fire that nothing could penetrate. The problem was geometry. The drone was diving at 52 degrees. The guns could only elevate to 45. The tracers arced into empty sky, 200 rounds in 3 seconds. None of them came close. The drone-shaped charge hit the engine compartment at 0625. Belbeck had just lost its point defense. The early warning radars were debris. The fire control radar was scrap. The Panzer was burning. But 4 FP2s were still airborne, turning toward the flight line. And there, sitting on the apron in the middle of an active attack, was a MiG-31 interceptor with its canopies open. Here's where Russian decision-making enters the realm of performance art. While drones were actively destroying the base's defenses and explosions lit up the night 800 meters away, someone in the 38th Fighter Aviation Regiment had decided this was the ideal time to knock out that quarterly maintenance. Maybe they thought the attack was over. Maybe they were trying to get the aircraft airborne to hunt the drones. Whatever the logic, the result was a $40 million interceptor sitting in the open air with no air defense coverage and its canopies up like it was waiting for a wash. The FP-2 approached from 380 meters altitude. The camera showed the MiG-31 clearly, twin-tail silhouette, engine bay still warm from its last sortie, the dark rectangles of open cockpits. The operator centered his crosshairs on the wing root where the fuel tank met the weapons bay. Altitude 200 meters. Terminal dive. The shape charge detonate at 0628. A shape charge doesn't just explode, it focuses. The warhead is lined with a copper cone, and when that explosive detonates, it collapses that cone inward at 8,000 meters per second, turning solid metal into a superheated liquid jet thinner than a pencil. That jet punches through anything in its path. It's how a 105-kilogram warhead destroys a 40-ton tank. The blast punched through the titanium skin, through the fuel bladder, and into the weapons bay where the missiles were waiting. The secondary explosion sent debris cartwheeling across the tarmac in burning pieces. The aircraft that had been hunting Ukrainian drones was now scattered across 200 meters of concrete. 3 FP-2s still circled overhead, cameras recording the destruction below. And somewhere in the 38th Regiment's command post, someone made exactly the wrong decision, scramble fighters to hunt the remaining drones. 2 Su-27s began rolling out of their hardened shelters at 0631. Engines spinning up, maintenance crew performing quick pre-flight checks. The Su-27s thought they were the hunters. They were about to become the hunted. By this time, the 2 Su-27 pilots were halfway through their pre-flight checks, but getting these birds airborne is much slower than just turning on your car and backing out of the driveway. First, the engines. A Saturn AL-31F turbofan takes 90 seconds to spool from cold start to idle thrust. Rush it and you'll risk a compressor stall, unburned fuel pooling in the combustion chamber, then igniting all at once. That's how you turn a $35 million aircraft into a fireball before it leaves the ground. Then the avionics. Flight computers need 30 seconds to boot. Navigation systems need another 45 to align the inertial platform. Gyroscopes have to establish a reference frame so the aircraft knows which way is up. Skip this step and your instruments are guessing. Then the flight controls. Hydraulic pressure check. Control surface sweep. Stick forward, stick back, stick left, stick right. Watching the ailerons and elevators respond. If something's frozen or disconnected, better to find out now than at 400 knots. Then the weapons. Radar needs to initialize. Missile seekers need to cool down. The R-73's infrared sensor runs on liquid nitrogen. Warm it up too fast and what you're carrying is useless. All of this takes time. 3 minutes minimum. 5 if you're careful. Longer if anything throws a fault code. The pilots at Velbek were rushing, skipping steps, trying to compress a 5-minute sequence into 3 because drones were circling overhead and every second felt borrowed. At 0633, the maintenance crews were finishing their pre-flight checks. In 45 seconds, the pilots would begin getting up to takeoff speed. But the FP-2s were already diving. The 2 Su-27s sat on taxiway 3, 50 meters apart, waiting for tower clearance. Technicians moved around the aircraft with flashlights, completing final checks and running through startup procedures, completely unaware that 3 drones were approaching from the north at 180 kilometers per hour. The 38th Regiment had maybe 50 Su-27s remaining. In the next 4 seconds, that number would drop to 48. The first shape charge detonated at 0634. Punching through the wing root into the weapons bay, 2 R-77 missiles were hanging on their pylons with live rocket motors. The sympathetic detonation threw debris across 200 meters of tarmac. Aviation fuel sprayed across the concrete and ignited. The fireball rose high enough to light up the entire flight line. The second drone hit 2 seconds later, striking the trailing aircraft from above. The blast passed through the canopy, through the cockpit, into the avionics bay below. The aircraft didn't explode like the first one. It just burned, fire spreading through the fuselage as fuel lines ruptured. 2 Su-27s destroyed in under 4 seconds. Combined value, $70 million. The third drone was already diving toward the control tower. The blast at 0635 took out the windows on the south face, shredding the radar screens and turned the communications equipment into shrapnel. Velbek would be conducting flights via smoke signals until further notice. Bye for now.